Let's see. Our third question this week is from Holly on Zone 2 Cardio. Hi, Rob. Love your work and consider you to be the sensible voice in this confusing space of health, training, nutrition, and longevity. So I'm hoping you can provide me with a bit of clarity. On a recent podcast, you touched on finding the right balance of strength and endurance, and I want you to expand on this a bit. I am a 44-year-old female whose primary goal is health and longevity. Years ago, I came across Mark Sisson's work and realized I had spent over 20 years doing what he would term chronic cardio, including running marathons. I abandoned this approach to focus on strength training with a bit of high-intensity interval training and 30 minutes a day of walking. This choice seemed to be confirmed by several in the health space, including the ketogains approach. Now, however, I'm hearing about how important Zone 2 cardio is for mitochondrial health. This was discussed extensively on Peter Attia's podcast with Dr. San Millen. So now I'm wondering, how much Zone 2 cardio should one be doing, and does this amount change if your goal changes? For example, if your goal is body recomposition versus overall health. How can I maximize strength gains while including cardio in my plan? Interference hypothesis question. I have 3 children who are 6 and under, plus I work full time, so I only have about 1 hour a day to devote to exercise.
Man, that's a hopping schedule. It's interesting. So as a baseline, looking at exercise as the place to go to induce a calorie deficit, on that kind of body recomposition side is not really the place to go, because as our first question alluded to, or the snack question, it's just so easy to overshoot that. So most of the recomposition story happens at the table, the way that we're eating. But from there, it's weight training is arguably the most important physical activity we should do. Like if you did nothing else, that would be the thing to do. And even if you're doing full body movements, squats, deadlifts, and particularly if you're doing a little bit of volume there and some shorter rest periods, you can get a mild kind of Zone 2 cardiac stimulus off that. So you can get a little bit of that. Swinging some kettlebells can be really good in that regard. I don't know that there's really kind of an optimum here, but I would say that lifting weights in preference to everything else is kind of a good place to go. From there, like what I've tried to do, if the weather is amenable and stuff, it just kind of works out. In where I would normally go on like an Airdyne or something to get a little bit of my Zone 2 cardio, I try to just like play tag with the kids. And so I try to weave it into other things. We generally take the dog for a good walk, and I put on a weight vest during that walk, and that gives me some low intensity cardio. So I try to drop it into the background instead of carving out a dedicated section for it. Jiu-jitsu is really good for that, because it's so long as my game is fairly relaxed and I'm not under Jason's mount top pressure, then it tends to be fairly low intensity comparatively. So I don't know if I entirely answered that question, but I think that the instinct or the impetus to focus on strength training is sound, so long as the volume and intensity of aerobic activity is not crazy, then that interference piece is not that significant. It's tough in that, given the limited amount of time to train, one would ideally need to, say, do 30 minutes of strength training, 30 minutes of cardio. That's not ideal, because the cardio does to some degree blunt the strength training adaptations, but nobody's entirely sure like how significant that is. And it really, my understanding of this concurrent training, you can still get stronger, you can still get better endurance, and to reasonably significant levels. Where it becomes critical to separate those is when you need to become more from intermediate to advanced. Mm-hmm. Then we need to start parsing that stuff out and separating it and whatnot. But for general health and fitness, like and longevity, and just looking at what bodybuilders have done for like 60 years, they do some strength training, then they do a little bit of cardio, and At some points in their cycle, they will drop the cardio because they really want to lean out or they're adding muscle mass or something like that. So they do some emphasis. But above and beyond that, like this is, it's funny. There was just a paper looking at the deleterious effects of metformin on muscle mass gain. And what's interesting is I've kind of suspected that being a problem for ages because metformin is not used in bodybuilding circles at all. It's just not there. And oddly enough, there's no randomized control trial on it, but this is where like a bunch of people comparing notes and they're like, yeah, metformin doesn't do anything for my body composition. And I think it looks worse. And you have several million people doing that. There is in fact some signal that emerges out of that noise. And so similarly, the fact that, bodybuilders will do their strength training session, do their lifting section, and then walk on an inclined treadmill at a moderate pace and do that post-workout. And that's not massively negatively affecting their gains, then I think that there's some sound information to pull from that.